question on repeating the command after giving the positive punishment marker. I've seen quite a few people say that repeating the command is an anti-pattern and teaches lazy listening. Instead, they suggest command and then mark and punish, repeat as necessary, unless there is obvious confusion, in which case you should probably still be in the reinforcement part of the training anyway. Do you have a different take on this style of training?
This is another good question. So I remember when she left both these questions, I was like, damn, I'm excited to get into these two a little bit, because they force you to think outside the box a little bit. Okay, so let's look at markers, right? So either positive markers or negative markers, right? You have two types of markers that you can use, right? You have what we refer to as bridge markers, and you have what we refer to as terminal markers, right? Okay. So a bridge marker is something that you'd use in order to connect behaviors together, right? Now, generally speaking, bridge markers you would only use with like positive, right? So like positive reinforcement, stuff like that, right? Yeah. Or I should say with reinforcement in general, because it's a continuation. Let's say I'm doing a sit, right? And I want to reinforce the sit command, but I don't want to release the dog out of position. I could use a bridge marker, like my good marker, to go and reinforce that position, which is going to increase the likelihood the dog wants to stay in that command, but I don't have to terminate the entire exercise, right? They can continue staying in that sit, and I can continuously reinforce it, extending that position out. Right? Gotcha. Or if I'm doing a sequence of behaviors, right? So we used to teach in competition dog training, sit down, stand. They would have to go through the sequence of performing those behaviors, right? I could reinforce each individual command without ending the exercise. So I could say sit, good, reward. Stand, good, reward. Down, good, reward. And I could work through that whole sequence, reinforcing every step without ever needing to break the dog from command or stop the exercise, right? Terminal markers we use to end the exercise and to provide reinforcement or punishment, right? So let's use it from a positive standpoint first. Let's say I'm working the dog from a distance, right? And I tell them down. They down really far away from me, and I tell them yes. That marks and identifies that behavior they were doing, so the down from a distance. It allows them to actively get out of position and come to me to get that reward. And at that point, once they've gotten the reward, we're done with what we were just working on. There's no longer an expectation of you. It marks the end of the sequence of whatever it was that we were working on, right? Yeah. The way that we train our no marker is we train it as a terminal marker, meaning you screwed it up. Here's your correction for it. Let's reset and try again, right? Now, to the point of, I think she was saying, like it causes, can you read the last part of it again? Causes lazy listening, and you should still be in the reinforcement stages, whatever. Yeah,
I've seen quite a few people say that repeating the command is an anti-pattern and teaches lazy listening. Instead, they suggest command and then mark and punish, repeat as necessary, unless there's obvious confusion.
Okay, so the last part about the obvious, I'm going to kind of jump around a little bit. I want to get to the repeating command as an anti-pattern and lazy listening and things like that. Yeah. So let's look at using an aversive. Right? Okay. And let's say I punish for a behavior. Let's say, whatever, I ask the dog to down. The dog didn't down, and I tell them no, and I give them a big correction for it because we're past teaching stages. You screwed up. Here's a big correction, right? We have to be mindful that in the act of giving a big correction, there is going to be this minute of like, whoa, what just happened?
Yeah.
Right? In that moment, the aversive, in addition to decreasing whatever it was that we just punished for, provides a moment of confusion in itself, right? What the heck just happened? I screwed it up, right? So by making your marker and your punishment sequence a terminal marker, it allows you to give the punishment. We're done now. You screwed it up. There's no expectation of you in this moment. Let's take a minute, regather ourselves both for the dog's sake as well as the handler's sake, and then follow through on giving whatever sort of information it is that we want the dog to do to restart the sequence, right? Okay. So that's the way we train it. I genuinely feel like this idea that like we should just be correcting, and the dog should just figure out how to do it. Well, if you start getting into those stages, technically you are using negative reinforcement again.
Yeah.
Right? Because let's look at this, right? Let's say that's my expectation, right? I want the dog to do a downstay, right? Okay. And the dog doesn't do the downstay, and they break command, and I go, no tap, no tap, no tap, no tap, no tap, right?
Yeah.
Implying whatever this individual said, right?
Over,
Even though I'm not using steady, continuous pressure in that moment, I am using a form of negative reinforcement, meaning I'm providing consistent corrections that will only turn off once you do the behavior.
Yeah.
So that would be no longer a punishment sequence. That would be negative reinforcement.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
So then you get back to, she said, well, then if there's obvious confusion, you should still be in the reinforcement stages. It's like, okay, well, you're using negative reinforcement then. Right? Yeah. So you're in the reinforcement stages still, which would then say that you need to give the dog better help than in that moment, which kind of shifts back to the terminal marker of the no, which is I give the correction, I give the dog a minute to process that information, and then I go help them back into command. Because what would we be doing if we were doing negative reinforcement, which what they're describing is negative reinforcement in that moment? I would be applying, let's say I'm saying no tap, no tap, no tap, no tap, no tap, and I expect the dog to fix themselves, right? Meaning I want them to escape the pressure.
Yeah.
I would be using leash pressure to guide them back into position.
Yeah.
Right? I wouldn't be sitting there just no tap, no tap, no tap, no tap, no tap. Because after like 4 or 5 no taps, it's like the dog doesn't even know. Like they're just trying to figure out what do I need to do to shut the behavior off or shut the pressure off. And if we're not providing any sort of information in the form of verbal help, then at that point, leash pressure help, a lure, something like that, how are they going to know how to turn it off then in that moment?
Yeah, they don't.
Right?
Yeah.
So we have to look at this from the lens of in a punishment sequence, we're marking, we're punishing, then we're terminating the behavior at that point, right? In the reinforcement stages, we would be providing consistent corrections that the dog needs to turn the pressure off. And in that stage, generally speaking, we would be wanting to give help as well, right? So the reason why I don't follow that principle is because exactly what we described. My no marker is a terminal marker. It marks the end of the sequence. From there, I can go put the dog back into command, right?
Sure.
I think sometimes we could fall into this trap of expecting a little too much out of the dog as far as like immediate compliance with things or fixing themselves or whatever. And that all just comes down to like, what's the picture that you're training, right? Let's use another example, right? So like we train bed stays, obviously. Now, in the context of the facility, like over the course of the program, if the dog's doing a board and train program, we don't get super crazy with like sending the dog from afar to the bed. Right? It's not a picture that we train. The reason for it is there's entirely too many beds in the room that we work it on where it would just cause confusion of like, holy shit, which one do I want to go to? We're trying to create a little bit of a visual pattern of like the thing that I'm near is what I want you to get on, et cetera, right? Okay. So we train the picture of when I'm next to the bed, I give you the bed command, you have to get onto it, right? So let's say I'm, working the behavior from afar. Right? And I put the dog on the bed and I walk away from them and I go 40 feet away from them and then the dog breaks command and I tell them no and give them a correction for it. Right? In that moment, if what they're saying is true, the dog would be expected to fix themselves. But we don't train the expectation of them fixing themselves from afar, meaning fixing themselves when I'm far away from the bed.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So by using it as a terminal marker, I could mark, punish. There's no expectation of you fixing yourself in that moment. And then I could go back to whatever it is, the picture of giving the command, which is me being next to the bed, and give that cue and expect them to get onto the bed then at that point. And they're not doing anything wrong in between because I've marked and I've ended the sequence. Right?
Yeah.
Or if the expectation was that they needed to fix themselves in that moment, it would be quote unquote wrong because I've never trained the picture of them going to the bed from when I'm well away from them.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of my idea behind it, and that's why we train that in that way, obviously. So you just have to be clear about what your expectations are with things. So because it's a terminal marker for us, that's the reason why we repeat that command after the fact. I think there's a lot of benefit to it. Like I said, when you're giving a more firm correction for something, it gives the dog a minute to just like, okay, I got the correction.
Yeah.
Shake it off for a minute. Now, what is it that I need to do again? Oh, this. Great. right? It gives you the opportunity to like hit the reset button once you've still corrected for it at that point, right?
Yeah.
Now, getting back to the lazy listening and like it creates an anti-pattern and all that kind of stuff, let's look at it this way, right? Let's say what I'm saying is true, right? And you could use it in that fashion as a terminal marker and reset the dog back into position, right? If my correction was well-timed, meaning the dog knew what it was for, meaning they got a correction for breaking command, they were like, oh shit, I got this correction for breaking command, and the pressure was motivating enough where they want to avoid it or escape it moving forward, and I then reset them back into position and 60 seconds later put them in that down stay, why would they break the command again then at that point?
Yeah, they wouldn't.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Right? So if I were running into a position where it's like, you know, people will look at it like you're creating lazy listening. Let me gather my thoughts for the rest of this. Hold on. If you're creating this expectation that would create lazy listening, why would the dog perform something lazily if they're motivated by the consequence for what it is that we're specifically stopping?
Yeah.
Right?
I don't know.
And in that sequence, the correction is for breaking command.
Yeah.
Right? So the dog will not break command again if my punishment was well-timed and I gave adequate information to get them into the position then after the fact. Now, let's say the expectation we were training was that the dog wasn't getting into command fast enough, right? Let's say I told the dog down, they didn't down. I told them no and gave a punishment for it. Then I gave them a down command again, 30 seconds later and got them into position. The next time I go to do that repetition, why would the dog be slower with getting into the down? They wouldn't, because they got a correction for being too slow getting into the down already.
Exactly, yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So this is where you get back to the micro details. Your emphasis, let's use the example of breaking a downstay here, right? In that sequence of things, the punishment is for breaking the downstay. The punishment is not for getting into the downstay. So if I fixed the breaking of the downstay, but the dog was being slow still with getting into the downstay, then I would start adding in corrections for not getting into the downstay fast enough, right?
Yeah.
And that's where you get to punishment is not for increasing behavior, it's for decreasing behavior. And what are you trying to decrease specifically in the moment of working that exercise? Is it the duration? Is it the distance? Or is it the speed of getting into the command in the first place because of likely distractions present?
Yeah. I don't see how it would create an anti-pattern. Like, why?
I would need a little more clarification on like anti-pattern. Like, what does that actually mean specifically? Yeah. Let's see.
I'm not sure.
Let's see if there's an actual definition for that. Anti-pattern. What is the meaning of anti-pattern? The anti-pattern is a commonly used process, structure, or pattern of action that, despite initially appearing to be an appropriate and effective response to a problem, has more bad consequences than good one. Okay, so basically it's a pattern that in theory makes sense, but in practice has more consequences than benefits, right? So my question would be, what are the consequences of doing it? We would have to look at then what are the consequences of doing it this way. The consequences, I'm assuming, are the lazy listening. But if you were to really look at this, well, first off, in practice, right, it doesn't, right? Like it fixes the problem, right?
Yeah, exactly.
We've been doing it for a while, and there have been no issues or ramifications. like the dogs will do better because of it.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Yeah, so I would ask follow-up questions to like what are the bad consequences to doing it that way? I don't think that there are any.
Yeah.
Right?
I don't think so either.
So again, like you just got to get back to like anytime you get into like quadrants of learning or like using any of this type of stuff, like like what are you trying to increase or what are you trying to decrease then at that point?
Yeah. Exactly.
Now, I could argue, let's say we were running into a lot of situations where, post-punishment, giving the command, the dog, like let's say getting into a downstay. Forget duration for a minute. Let's say I'm teaching a dog just to get into the downstay, right? I tell them down, they don't do it. I tell them no, I give a punishment, give them a second, then I give a down command again, and the dog still doesn't do it. Then I follow through my punishment sequence. I need to do it 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 times, right? Yes. At that point, then, if I'm giving adequate information, right, I'm following through with the sequence, I know my motivation is good enough. If the dog still wasn't performing it up to par, and let's say that was happening regularly, not just like, oh, okay, cool, the dog's done it really well in like 3 environments, but in this 4th really distracting environment, I'm needing to punish a couple extra times. Let's say it was happening just like in the training facility or places like that. Yes, at that point, I would argue what you're saying, which is like you probably should be focused more on reinforcing that position a little bit in order to get the dog more quickly compliant with it and a little bit more quickly understanding what it is we want them to do, right? So there is some truth to like, if your punishment sequence is not working, right, and you are getting confusion, right? And, it's for something really, really simple like that. It's not for like, some sort of, like I said, big distraction or your level's too low or something like that. Yes, at that point, you might want to focus a little bit more on reinforcement.
For sure.
So.
Cool. All right. Moving on.
Yeah. Let's actually, I have one more follow-up to that. Like getting back to like lazy listening. This is not what this person is asking, obviously, but a similar thing that I hear people ask very, very frequently. And I think one of these questions kind of gets into this a little bit is this idea that, if I reward a dog post correcting them for a behavior, that I'm going to train them to make the mistake to access the reward. That is such a ridiculous state of mind because let's look at this, right? Let's say I've got treats, dog really likes the treats, and I'm working a down state, and the dog makes the mistake, and I punish for that mistake. And again, the punishment was well-timed, and the punishment was motivating enough, right?
Okay.
Dog fixes themselves, then I tell them good, and I reward them for getting in that position. A lot of people would look at that and be like, wow, you just rewarded the dog for doing it wrong. False. Here's why it's false. First off, there's a 2-part sequence. I punished for non-compliance of the behavior, right? Punishment, by definition, decreases behavior. So it should decrease the dog not getting into position when I ask for the command.
Yeah.
Right? Reward is to increase behavior. Now, where is that reward coming in the sequence? It's coming when the dog is in the correct position. So in order for that mentality to be accurate, what I would have to do is I would have to flip-flop them, and I would have to say down. The dog doesn't do the down. I reward them for not doing the down. Yeah. Then I punish them for it. You know what I mean? Yeah. I would have to totally flip it around in order for that to be accurate. Because what I've done by implementing both of those things at the same time is I've decreased not getting into the down when asked, and then I've increased getting into the down in the first place. Yeah. Right? So I think sometimes we get a little too hung up on with the reinforcement, the things that you can and cannot reinforce, and you're not going to train a dog to want that punishment. Yeah. You're not going to if it's motivating enough.
Definitely not.
Right? So that was my last thing to put to it is